can do that. Let me just double check that we are where we should be. We are. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Kathryn. It is such a joy to have you here. Little proviso, and I think, Kathryn, we were saying this is going to fit in quite nicely with our conversation, is that we are far from perfect. Today we are live, but we've had to go live to our Facebook group rather than our Facebook page because my technological skills are a work in progress. What we're going to do is make sure that it then goes to the page as well and everywhere else. We've got a lovely Lisa in the background letting people know where we are right now. So good morning, Kathryn.
Good morning.
I think we're going to be talking about parent well-being and I think those imperfections as well, aren't we, and how to look after each other. But yes, maybe a good place to start is, why have we invited you here to talk about this? Who are you?
Thank you. Well, it's really lovely to join you, Benedicte, and to join all those who are listening in and engaging with us. It's quite nice just to imagine who might be with us, Benedicte. And of course, you know a lot of the faces, I'm sure, whereas I don't. So I guess I just wanted to say hello and thanks for being with us, everybody. So my background is as a doctor and as a psychiatrist, but particularly in child and family and parent psychiatry and psychotherapy. And to give you a bit of a flavour, for 10 years I led a service for women and men and couples who were pregnant or having a baby at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And so that was all about, how do we help the relationships at the very beginning of life, from pregnancy into the early years. And now I'm working in Surrey, and I joined Surrey just before the pandemic started. So Benedicte, have we even met face to face?
We haven't.
I don't think we have we?
We've been in several meetings together.
Yeah, but we haven't actually been in the same room together. So, and of course, one of the wonderful things has been that we can connect so much online, but I think we all miss the physical being and the three-dimensional beings. So anyway, I joined Surrey, and the particular focus was to bring in my experience and training of working with families and thinking about, how do we really support parents and babies and young children to grow up happily and healthily from pregnancy right on into the early years. So my focus in Surrey is working in the first 1,000 days program, which is from conception right through pregnancy and the first 2 years of life. So, but as Benedicte knows, I have my feelers out and connect and collaborate with whoever would like to, really, whether that's in childcare. I'm doing some lovely work thinking about how we support practitioners to really engage in the way that they want to with babies and parents. I work with education at different ages and levels, with the voluntary sector, with health. So really on the broad way of thinking about relationships. So I'm all about relationships and how we think about what's going on between children and their parents, and between parents and their children. And that, I think, is why you've invited me, Benedicte.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that I was really keen to have you here for is, as you're right, you know, I see you in all sorts of meetings, and actually, you know, I think it's the first time that I've really twigged that you were linked to the first 1,000 days.
Right.
We talk about all sorts of things, and I know in when we're talking in this participation work, one of the big focuses in the world of additional needs is that notion of preparation for adulthood. And in the outside world, most of us start thinking about that in the teenage years. But actually, when we're doing all of the strategic work and the thinking about whole life, we almost start right at the beginning, thinking, how is this little baby or this baby to be going to be, what support are they going to need to become this fully fledged adult person? So you fit into all of these. I think one of the things that you felt like absolutely the right person to have this conversation with, because when you talk about parents, you talk about us with enormous compassion. And you've always championed parents rather than anything that can sound like blame. And I think in this world of additional needs, parents, we often feel blamed.
Yes.
I think probably a lot of the time without any intention. And I remember, as an example, I remember taking my little baby who was 10 weeks old. I was a bit worried. I didn't know what was going on, but I had kind of something's not right. And I was subjected to an hour of a doctor looking and going, well, can't you see he's terribly ill?
Oh.
And that for me, I received as I've done so much wrong. It's my fault. I've done this wrong. And I think a lot of practitioners don't realize sometimes, or they forget that as a parent, we do parent blame a lot ourselves, don't we?
Yes.
And anything that can be interpreted negatively.
We blame ourselves too, exactly. And it's sometimes hard to know, is the blame coming from the person over there, or are we just ready to blame? And actually, when you were talking, there were two things came to mind. One is that personally, I'm a parent, and I also happen, well, it's not just happened, because that, of course, has made me who I am, but I grew up within a family who have many additional and complex needs. And so, and within a family and an extended family who have found ways of managing the good moments, the bad moments, the awful moments. So of course, my approach comes from that too, and probably as much as that as my professional work. And the thing about blame, I think, is so key, because even right now, I know that some of you engaging with us will be thinking, yes, but I'm really, I really get it wrong all the time, and it's too late. It's never too late to kind of find new ways of supporting yourself, supporting your children. Yes, these early years are important, but we keep learning as parents what to do. I'm sure, Benedicte, your children are older. You know that we keep learning, and children keep changing. And even though a lot of the brain development is happening right now, which is why I find it a really exciting and important time to work, children, they do rewire and rework, and their brain can keep changing. Into adolescence is another time when children change again. But it's lovely to be talking with parents who mainly in this call have young children, because so much is happening, and you can help each of your children to become healthy within whatever that means for them. And there are ways of doing that.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And I want to say thank you for sharing that personal element. I think it becomes so much easier to have a conversation and to take down our defenses when we know the person in front of us properly, seriously understands and has that experience. So we wanted to focus really on parent well-being, and I know we were talking yesterday in a little bit of preparation, and I found myself thinking, well, we know that parents struggle often with these early years with sleeping and eating and that kind of thing, and my brain was thinking our children, and you very interestingly kind of said about, hang on a minute, how is the parent sleeping, and how is actually we need to look after ourselves as parents so that we can help things. And I think you did some work, particularly through the lockdown, didn't you?
Yeah.
To address those things. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I'd love to. Yes, one of the things that with the voluntary sector, with Surrey Youth Focus in particular, and also others within a couple of other charities in Surrey, we thought, how can we support parents during the beginning of the pandemic? And we did some Facebook postings, which are still available actually, but we did some really, I think what some people found really helpful, some postings thinking about what do children need from us day by day. And we tried to get hold of the mood of the week and choose a particular theme. And it might be about being at home, and how overwhelming it is for parents, for all of us, having our children at home all day, for example, or when our children were going back to school and our anxieties about that. So we looked at different things. And one of the things that I developed was something which was a way of saying, okay, when you're feeling overwhelmed and you don't know where to start, how about planting a seed? And the planting the seed was an acronym, SEED, for sleeping, eating, exercising, and delighting. That
I like delighting.
Well, delighting, when we're busy and we're trying to survive rather than thrive, we can forget that our children need us to delight in them just as much as they need us to help them sleep and eat and move. And the same for us as parents. You know, we are surviving a lot of the time, and especially when our children have particular needs that are intense and taking us over in a particular moment or a particular day or week, or if it's all the time. But how do we make space to think about our sleep, our nutrition, the way we eat, whether we can move our bodies or exercise or stretch or, you know, whatever it is, and have some joy. And there'll be people with us today, Benedicte, and you and I know about this too, because it's part of the human condition. There are days when joy is far away, and it's hard to even imagine quite how you get back to it. But
I think you're right, and I would go further, and I think for some of our families, and I've been there at times, there are weeks and months sometimes where joy is absent. Yeah. And it's really hard to, you begin to go through life in a kind of sense of a set of motions, and it feels like dry, and you just don't know where you're going or why you're going that way.
Yes, yes, yeah. So planting a seed is an invitation in those kind of moments to choose one of those four, either choosing it for yourself or for your child. Yeah. And for us to think, okay, the one of those that I would most like to get hold of is delight for myself as a parent. What might bring a little bit of joy into my day? What could that be? You know, what comes to mind? I mean, Benedicte, what comes to mind for you? If you know, were looking for a bit of delight or joy in your day, just a little, what would it be?
Do you know, it's a really interesting question, because as you were talking, I've got lots of different me's in my head. Yeah. The me now, I'm very fortunate. My children are now old. They're all over 18, Kathryn. It's how did that happen? And it's afforded me a little bit of time. And I'm finding after, you know, these 20 years of intense, extreme parenting, I've got a bit of space. And for me, I'm finding joy in music. I play the piano. Oh. But I'm also thinking back right in the beginning where I had my children very close together, and I had 3 children under 4. I didn't know what was going on. I did know that the youngest one was very, very ill. And that was, in a way, it was easier because it was visible. I knew that there was something with my 3-year-old, but we didn't know what it was at the time. And joy then was, that notion of, if you'd asked me what will give you delight, I didn't know how to answer that. No, I just couldn't. And I needed somebody to, one of the things that I found sometimes helped was if somebody said, let me make you a cup of tea. And that's going, and somebody to point out those little silver linings. Yes. Yes. I used to talk when things were a little bit more, we at least knew what we were dealing with. I talked about inch stones rather than milestones. Yeah. My children made inch stones of progress, but I needed to see them as they were huge. You know, the first time that my eldest son gave me a cuddle was on the day his sister was born. He was 2 years old. I'd given him cuddles, but he had never come to me for that connection.
That's special.
It was amazing. It was by far the best part of that day.
Amazing.
Birthing the second child, yes, lovely. But we came home the same day, and he had gone to bed that night. Mummy wasn't home in the morning because Mummy was busy doing other things, and then he went for a nap, and that's when we came home. So he came out of his nap, and there was this baby in a car seat, he had clearly not believed me when I was telling him there was a baby inside mummy's tummy.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked at her and when had a close look. And he didn't speak much at all. We used sign language a lot. He's since, we found out later that he is autistic. And he came and he sat on my lap and he cuddled me. And it was just the most joyous thing.
Yes.
And I think what I've also found as a parent with 3 quite complicated children, I've managed to store up these tiny little memories. And there aren't very many of them.
Wow.
But those are the things where I think I find that delight in going, oh, do you remember that day? Or do you remember that moment where she looked me in the eyes?
Yes, yes. And of course, that will be the case for some of us, that's the place we can find joy or delight. It's in seeing something our child can manage for the first time.
Yeah.
It's seeing their joy in doing something.
So Kathryn, there's a little comment that's come through from as we're talking from a parent, and as we were talking, as at Family Voice, as you well know, we represent this incredibly vast diversity of parent, because our remit is to represent families who have a child with additional needs, aged 0 to 25, and it's any additional need and any severity. A lot of the time, because we know that in that population, we know that an awful lot of those children have some kind of neurodiversity like autism or ADHD, and we talk a lot about those children. We sometimes forget the ones who've got really complicated medical needs.
Yes.
And we know that some of our parents who may not know that we're representing them yet, but they've either known before the baby was born or just at birth, something goes catastrophically differently than what was expected. And we have a parent here who's saying that their child had a diagnosis at birth and was admitted into the NICU, the intensive care unit. She says someone like Kathryn needs to be in hospital to support parents because it's very lonely living in a hospital as a parent.
Oh, yeah.
As we were talking, I was thinking I wasn't a parent like that. It was 10 weeks and then we found ourselves in that kind of situation. But there is something so utterly overwhelming about being faced with that kind of situation. I'm not sure that as humans we're very well equipped, because I suppose originally that baby might die and now we're having to kind of cope with these life-death moments in a space that's both incredibly isolating and where there's very little space for solitude to be able to sit and process. And I wonder what could we do to help support those parents? And as you say, do you know of any support for parents in those situations?
Well, one of the things that I think we're most proud of this year with the First 1,000 Days programme is that we were able to support psychotherapists now being present on all of the NICUs in Surrey.
Oh, wow.
So for the parent who asked the question, that is now happening, and we're trying now to get more permanent funding. But I completely agree with you, and I have done that work in the past, and it's a real privilege. And also, yes, I mean it couldn't be more intensely moving when you connect with the emotional experience of parents. And of course, it's quite hard for staff to be doing that all the time when they're also trying to manage the life and death experiences. So having a therapist who can hold and bear and accompany parents on special care or on the neonatal intensive care, I completely agree, is important. And
she's just actually said that's amazing. I think she must be feeling like me. Oh my goodness,
it's amazing. It is, and
amazing.
I think we feel so pleased about it. And it's actually therapists who are part of the parent infant mental health team in Surrey, led by Jo Goldsmith and Catherine Taylor. So it's the therapists within that team, and they've already seen hundreds of parents. I mean, they've done extraordinarily. I think for parents who've gone through that experience and didn't have that, it's never too late to meet with someone and talk through or make sense or process more what happened when you were in that experience in hospital. Or if you're going through it right now and you've got a child in hospital, sometimes we don't know what we need, do we? And that's, I mean, that comment's quite a profound one for all of us. We don't always know what we need, but
we don't. And I think one of the things that I found through this system is, as a parent, there is so many different stages, and it might start with a health visitor check, and the health visitor says, oh, they're not talking yet. And my experience was, he's bilingual. Of course, he's not talking yet. He understands everything I'm saying in both languages, and he's using sign language because that helps us navigate both languages. And actually, I was the parent in denial, and denial is a really difficult word, isn't it? Because I saw this amazing little boy who was climbing swings and doing all sorts of stuff. And yeah, he had the most phenomenal, what I now know were meltdowns, but the tantrums lasted for 3 days at a time. With, he'd stop for sleep and he'd wake up and straight into it again. Oh yeah. Oh, he has quite some will. And actually, I look back, and my health visitor clearly saw that there was something just a little bit different. And we live, particularly in this early years setting, when we were planning this event, what we were trying to do is, how do we reach the parent who doesn't yet know there's something that they will need extra help with? And how do we reach the parent who's in hospital and is up to their eyeballs in complexity and in fear of what's to come? And so we've got all of these parents at different stages, but at one point, I think all of us, when we've got a child who's complicated or who has additional needs, we're faced with this, this isn't in the baby books. What do I do? How do I deal with that? And there's the dealing with the child, because you're having to do it day to day, and we forget ourselves, don't we? And I loved, the notion of looking after ourselves in terms of that sleep and eat and exercise, the delighting. I'm going away with the delighting.
Yes.
But I also wonder, how can we help parents process that change of expectation?
And I guess what you're talking about is, hold on, this is not what I expected. Hold on. When I was looking forward and I had hopes and dreams about being a parent, this is not what I imagined it would be like.
Yeah.
And the anger about that, the frustration about that, the grief, the sadness, the tiredness, the guilt. Yeah. Is it something that I did? All of those kind of feelings that at times are really overwhelming and unbearable. So it's quite hard to see through them sometimes.
It really is. And it's, that it can be so many different things. And I remember really vividly when we got, so I use my examples because I've got quite a lot in change, and I hear from so many parents, and they really, they resonate with me. But particularly when I'm thinking of particularly emotive things, I would hate to assume what another parent feels.
Yes.
I hope that in sharing what I felt, there might be it kind of triggers discussions, doesn't it? Yes. I remember really vividly the night that Tom went into hospital. He was about 10 weeks old, or 11 weeks old. And we were told pretty quickly that they thought he had leukemia.
Oh.
And he's fine. He's 18. He did have leukemia. It was rubbish, but he's fine. But me back then, I remember seeing this little baby in the hospital bed, and all of a sudden my child had disappeared, and there was just this disease, and I was almost scared to touch him. And I remember making this kind of huge effort to say, hang on a minute, no, he hasn't changed. He's still there. But it was earth-shattering. It took so much work. And I think it was made a bit, we were in France at the time, and when he eventually came home a few weeks later, they were saying, if you're going to cuddle him, wear a mask and spray everything. We were in COVID times, but massively. And that notion of how can I treat him like a baby? How can I be his mummy?
How can I see Tom?
Yes.
Yeah, how can I see Tom?
Yes.
And I'm glad you said that, because there is something of us having to juggle all these different ways of talking about our children that we use and other people use. And, you know, I'm the kind of doctor that likes simple, plain English.
Yes.
That tries to, you know, I really try and hold on as much as possible to what makes sense, you know, as a way of describing, and recognizing that we're all so different. And
Yes.
so if you're looking at your baby and your child, what are the barriers for really seeing who he or she is, and what's the barrier for accepting him or her as they are? And there are many barriers, you know.
Yeah.
There's the barriers, you say, of this is not how he or she, or how parenthood was supposed to be. And if we're really honest with ourselves, that can feel really painful or quite uncomfortable, because, you know, then the guilt comes, but I should just accept him or her, and I should just accept it. And of course, no, it's really tough. It's not, it's, you know, we're human. It's not like that, is it? And so, and then the guilt in a way gets in the way of what actually we really do want to do, which is to see our baby or see our child and enjoy them for who they are, to delight in them for who they are, you know. Yes, see the inch stones, as you put it, and celebrate them for whatever those are. And I think, you know, part of that, I've got one picture to show, actually. I'll just find.
Yes, you should be able to share.
Yeah, let me find it.
We had a lovely story of a parent who shared they have a profoundly disabled little one, and that journey of accepting this child that they had not expected has been really difficult. But I just love the way that parent talks about their child as the most wonderful person. If you stop all the comparisons, there is a joy and a delight in that child, in their existence, that teaches us, you know, humans and adults,
exactly,
about life in its essence, I think. Then
yes, absolutely. Now,
and I find that so inspiring, really.
Can you see a picture now?
Yes, I can.
Do you? I don't know whether you know this book, Charles Mackay. It's the book called what's it called? It's this: The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. I don't know.
Yes, I have come across it. I've not. So I actually have a copy. I just haven't had. Yeah. I've not taken the time to open it properly.
So this one, what it says is, always remember, no matter how it feels, you're enough as you are, said the horse, more than enough. And for me, this is a lovely picture of us holding on to being good enough. And what does good enough mean? And for any parent, what a child needs is simply that we are good enough. We don't have to get it perfect. In fact, it's not really very helpful to children if we always get it perfect, because we learn on the edges of frustration, on the edges of difficulty and challenges, don't we, as well? But that being good enough when you have a child with additional needs or complex needs, we're much more likely to do even more of what all parents do, which is think, oh, I'm really not doing well enough. I'm not doing what, you know, enough.
You know, it's really interesting, because another comment has just come about that I think speaks to that a little bit. Of it's a parent that says communication is key, not speech and language. And I think one of the things that happens with many of our parents is that we find ourselves in a world that most parents don't ever encounter. Yes. And it's this maze, and we see different professionals in different capacities, and we learn a whole different language. My children have learned that language as well. So my children will talk about, you know, provision, and they will talk about speech and language, and they'll talk about occupational therapy and gastrostomies and all of this language that no child their age would understand. But as parents, we do the same, and we have to learn that language, because the professionals in our child's life demand it of us. But I think all of us adults around these children get wrapped up in things like speech and language and actually communication.
Yes.
Does it matter? Does it really matter if my child can't make eye contact? Now, I was taught that eye contact was really important. I now have 2 of my children are autistic. They are very, very clear that, yes, they can make eye contact if I need them to, but they won't be able to understand, hear, or process anything I tell them.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, the best way for them to communicate is if they're looking somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
And I find that it's true. We get stuck in these rules. Yes. Where as adults around these children, sometimes we forget that actually we can talk to that child
and find out what's it like being you.
Yes.
You know, what's it like when we look at each other? And even a child who can't tell you with words, they can tell you by their behavior, by the way they move their body, by so many things, the color in their face, their muscles around their mouth. You know, there's so much, isn't there? There's so much information.
And actually what you're describing is so subtle and so small that there's really only ever going to be one person who completely is able to help them communicate to the outside world, and that's mum or dad, isn't it? Especially when they're little. Yeah. I saw an amazing program just the other day, slightly diverging, but it was Top Gear, and they did a tribute to a motorcycle jumper called Eddie Kidd. I know nothing of this world, but he had an accident, had suffered a traumatic brain injury, and they went to visit him, and he's reliant on a carer. He's very minimally verbal, and you or I wouldn't be able to understand him. But what I loved in the film was they filmed the conversation. The carer could understand what he was saying and was translating it. And you're right, it's in these tiny moments. What I loved about that was it's the first time I think I've seen on television or something like that, a camera give enough time for somebody to communicate. And I think for our children, particularly when they're little, when, let's face it, no baby comes out talking, to actually say, well, in this case, the carer has spent enough time with him that he can translate the noises, the sense. And as mums and dads, that's what we do with our babies and our little ones all the time, isn't it?
We do, and we don't even know how much we're doing it. You know, if someone videoed you with your child and then we went through it picture by picture, which I sometimes will do, and there are ways of doing that, through video interaction. What you see is how much parents are doing without even knowing. You know, they might be just putting their hands out in order to welcome a child in. They might be resting a child and stroking. They might be using their voice to soothe. There's so many things going on so many levels. So even when we feel like we're doing very little, or we're getting it all wrong, or we're not enough, we are doing a lot. And for our child, we're all they want. You know, we are enough.
Yeah,
we are enough. And actually, one of the things in terms of preparing to talk with you today, the prayer, which you can take in a religious way or a non-religious way, is that prayer, God grant me the serenity. Do you know that one?
Yes.
Shall I found it again because I thought I might just read it out, just because it's, and as I say, it's you know, it can be Mother Universe, or it can be God, or whatever works for you. But the sentiment about it I'd like to talk about. So, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I guess I was thinking about that in relation, for example, your story of your son having a tantrum that might last 3 days. The reality was that he probably couldn't manage anything very different in that moment than, you know, he was overwhelmed with experience and emotion, and he couldn't find his way out of it. You know, that was going to happen.
Yeah.
How in that moment do you accept that that's what is going to happen, and be alongside him until he can find his way out with your support?
Yeah.
So the bit that you can't change in that moment, you couldn't have changed it probably.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things, it's certainly one of the things that I've learned as the parent of children with additional needs. And I know we're focusing on early years, but I think one of the things that's really important to me is many of our members have children who have either they'll have global developmental delay, so actually they present as much younger for a lot longer, or even, you know, I'm thinking of children or young people I know who are, I hate the term high functioning, Kathryn, I really, really hate it, but who have enormous abilities in some respects, and then in other respects are really, really young. So much of what we're talking about applies to a much broader range of parents. One of the things that took me a long time to learn is that understanding that when they were in that tantrum or that meltdown, there was nothing I could do, and all of the parenting strategies that I'd been told were of no use at all in that moment. And actually what we found is that meltdowns started being shorter when I stopped trying to fix it.
Well, this is the thing, and what I was thinking in terms of that advice from this prayer is you can't change that he would have a meltdown sometimes, that was going to happen. But what you can change is your response to it. And, you know, you will know that sometimes they would last 3 days, some 2 days, some 4 days. And if we are courageous, we know as parents the way in which we might help it to be 2 days, 3 days, or 4 days. And what you've just described is exactly it, that if you were able to say, you know, using a particular strategy is not going to work. He needs me in a state of mind where I accept that he can't be different, and I need to be with him and accept that this is how he's feeling and how it's coming out. I need to keep him safe. I need to keep myself safe. We're not going to get physically hurt through this if at all possible. But what he needs, it's a state of mind. It's a poor old him, you know, he's really having a tough time, and so am I.
Yeah. One of the things, do you know, that really you remind me of in that is sometimes it's too hard to sit alongside with, and actually just being there is you find yourself unable. I know there were times when I ended up having to leave my child in their room, and I'd close the door and I'd go and hide myself away in the toilet because that was the only place that had a lock on it.
Yes.
And I had to remove myself because I couldn't actually manage my own emotions anymore.
And that you see is the next stage. So that's absolutely part of the whole thing. It's also the wisdom to say, what do I need in this moment in order to mother my child? I need to remove myself and have some time out myself.
Yeah,
that's give myself space so that I can feel calmer. I might need a cup of tea. I need to call someone. He's safe, safe enough. I need some time out.
I like the safe enough because I hear you, and yet every mothering thing in my brain is going, but no, I'm letting him down. I'm failing him because he needs me. And that push and pull is so hard.
I know. And yet, you know, why I like to work with parents and why I think a lot about relationships between parents and children is because I know that our children need us to be bigger, stronger, wiser, kind, in the words of Circle of Security. They need us to attend to our needs. You know, the other thing that came to mind this morning was that that what's said on a plane. I haven't been on a plane for a long time, but I'm sure they still say, you know, if you have children with you, put on your oxygen mask first before putting on theirs. And the thing is, actually, when I thought about that saying, I felt really quite emotional because as a parent, we don't want to do that. We want to put it on our child first. It's like, what do you mean put mine on first? I've got to look after my baby. I can't do that. But actually, if we're going to look after our children, we have to look after our emotional state, our physical state, our survival, in order to be the parent our child needs us to be.
Yeah. The other thing, I'm aware that we're coming probably to the end of our time. We've had such a nice conversation. I'm as I'm listening to us talking, I'm also hearing that we've talked about some really challenging experiences of parenting, and we're probably talking to parents who are in the middle of that at the moment. I suppose I wanted to ask you, because you've had, as a professional, you've had experience of so many families. I'm just one, and I speak to a lot of parents, but I'm just me. I'm coming to I'm entering a new phase, but with my children, we've left childhood. I come and I look with Tom, for example, the fact that he lived, I win. Yay, it's fantastic. But I suppose, wanted to hopefully offer a message of hope. It seems to me that as much as we see our children grow, we are growing as parents, and things can get better. And I think that's, I suppose, I wonder, how do we reassure and help parents see that however bad things are now, it doesn't mean they're going to stay that way.
And of course, that's the same message to all parents, isn't it? There's something about the intensity of parenting a baby. You know, when you're in that state, it's hard to imagine that it's going to change, and it does. And the same with when you're, and the same as with a child with additional needs. They're both developmentally where they're at, and they also have particular needs. And of course, those things connect, but it means they really will grow up.
Yeah.
Your child is still going to grow up, whatever that means for them. Your child will, learn new things, become more mature, understand the world in a more sophisticated way, whatever the level of their disability or their needs. It will change.
That can be really hard, isn't it? If you've got a child that has really profound difficulties in particular. I hear from parents whose child is a teenager and says, well, they function like a 2-year-old. That's a really common phrase.
Yes.
How do we as parents how do you see beyond that 2-year-old presentation?
And it's also an interesting, and I don't think it does show the whole picture, because a teenager, again, it's hard, isn't it? Without, it's hard to, I recognize as I'm talking that I'm, we keep in a way having to generalize, don't we? Because
absolutely,
parents listening thinking, yes, but how does that fit to my child? But I invite you to really think that what I'm saying might connect to you, in that a teenager who, you might, people say functions as a 2-year-old, they're not, they have different developmental experiences, and they will, their understanding on some things might be like a 2-year-old, but their understanding on other things may be way beyond that, and their understanding of how relationships work and the way that you've helped them to become part of the family or part of society, or to enjoy or delight in things that will be as a teenager often.
And we all grow into our bodies, don't we? We have an experience of our bodies that is going to be different. That it's a fascinating thing, because I think we, particularly when our children are developing differently, it's really hard as a parent to follow that and make sense of it globally. I think we get stuck. We also get so stuck in wanting to support our children, and therefore, we're almost forced to focus on the difficulties they have. And we talk, so many professionals come to us and say, we're interested in a strength-based model, and I go, yes, but and if I tell you just the strengths, you're not going to help me with the stuff that's difficult. And you're going to send me away saying, look, they're absolutely fine. And I think that's the notion of the strength-based model as a parent is very, very hard to hear because of the implications.
And on the flip side, it's also very hard telling your whole story of all the things that have happened, and exhausting, isn't it, to then come out the other end of that. I'm always very hesitant giving advice, but I'm going to share one bit that people can either take or leave. And it's that wonderful phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. That I think the biggest, one of the biggest things we can all do is to really think about if this is where we're at today with our family, whatever their needs, whatever their strengths and talents, whatever the hilarities and whatever the pains and distresses, if we're really going to be in it, what does our own support network look like? Do we have one? If we haven't got one, where could we even start to work out what it could look like? Who might we talk to about that? About, you know, what might support you just a little bit, because it's that being in relationship with someone else that changes our emotional states. It has an effect, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I think, you know, certainly it's one of the things that we try and do at Family Voice. We're not a support group, but we are a place to gather, and we're a place to meet people who've had similar experiences, who have enough understanding that they might be part of our village.
Yes.
And one of the things we do is we try and find, you know, those organizations or those groups where we can say, oh, you know, you've come to us with this situation. Actually, we happen to know a group of parents who's already gathering. Yes. And it's one of the most moving and satisfying parts of what we do, because I think all of us, when we arrive from a place of isolation, and you're right, we need people, we need our children, possibly more than many, more than just a mum and dad.
Yes, and it's working out what that means for us, because some of us are not group people, and the thought of meeting a group is like, no, you know. Yeah. For others we are, and it's what does it look like for you? You know, one thing that I share with some parents is how about finding a buddy who you can leave a voicemail message for, or send a WhatsApp audio message, and the task is to just speak for 3 minutes and send it, and just tell that person what life has been like for you today. And then their task is to send one back, not with any solutions, not fixing what you've shared, but just saying what life is like for them. And do it at the kind of frequency that's helpful. It might not be very often, it might be sporadic, or it might be regular, again, depending what kind of organizational level you wish for. But it's having a kind of a voice message buddy.
Lovely, thank you.
It can be the middle of the night, it can be any time, you know.
That feels like a really lovely place to end. I need to tell all of our listeners that you've very, very generously given us an additional bit of time, I think tomorrow morning, haven't you? And what we're hoping to do is have a slightly more interactive kind of, we've had a couple of comments today, but any of you who have questions for Dr. Hollins, okay, I think of you as Kathryn, yes. We have an email address, questions@familyvoicesurrey.org, or obviously on our Facebook group, contact us however you want. And I will put a post, because off the top of my head, I can't remember what time we're meeting tomorrow, but we will do that. Thank you so much. I think certainly I've found this really fascinating conversation, and I hope we've covered a range of possible experiences that might help a good number of parents listening to us today.
It's 10 o'clock tomorrow, I believe.
10 o'clock tomorrow. You see, you're better organised than I am.
And I also think it'd be worth saying that we have an event in December, don't we, which is a 0 to 4 particularly event, really thinking about how we communicate and pick up what our babies need, which I'm joining Family Voice for.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We're really
lovely to join you. Thanks, Benedicte.
Thank you. I'm going to go and press stop on the recording.
Great.